Hello, dear community, and very welcome to our live talk on scaling in the USA. We have two excellent startups with us with a lot of experience on the topic, and Jan Bruckner from the US Embassy in Austria, Vienna. Jan, welcome to our studio, and thank you for organizing this talk.
Thank you very much for having me.
From New York, Susanne from Midfox, the founder from Austria. Hey, Susanne.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
And from Bucharest, Michna Kalin from Coda Intelligence. Michna, hello.
Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you.
Everyone.
Jan, let's start with a question. Why did you invite these two startups to our show today, and what are we going to talk about? What is your role in also connecting startups, helping them to scale in the USA?
Absolutely. Just a very quick intro from my end, that audience has idea who I am. So my name is Jan Bruckner. I'm working at the US Embassy's commercial section, the head of, or let's say the lead for technology, and very much focusing on supporting startups in Austria in setting up and expanding in the US. And I wanted to have two, let's say, case studies or very successful founders to join this session. And definitely Susanne from Midfox is the best case study that we could have. And Michna from Coda Intelligence is basically one of our clients. So my colleague Monica in Bucharest worked closely with Michna, and he has been at one of our programs. And I think it's always best to hear directly from a company that went through the process to share their do's and don'ts, their learnings. That's basically the background. And Susanne, I think I know you now from 4 or 5 years. First time we met at the 4 Game Changer, and then you had this great success story. You get on board of the Techstars accelerator, and now living in New York. So I think the best case study that we could have right now.
Okay, so let's case study you, Susanne. Or how were your steps when you were approaching the US market? Let's start on that level, and then we'll deep dive into the do's and don'ts and learnings about it.
Sure. So I started Midfox in Austria, and then decided to move to the US around a year and a half ago, so right before the pandemic. And the reasons for moving to the US was basically that we realized that the Austrian and German market was just not as ready for our solution as the US market was. And we started off with just running some ads and figuring out if maybe our solution was better accepted in the US. And we realized that it was actually true that the US market was much more ready for our solution. Maybe just a quick background, Midfox offers independent professionals an all-in-one solution to handle online meetings and get paid for online meetings with your clients. And so we just realized that the US market was doing that already a lot, and they were very accustomed to having video calls with their clients. They were also very used to offering the appointments online. And when we were trying to sell our service in Austria, we always heard the same excuse that, oh no, my clients want to meet me in person. And no, my clients don't want to book a meeting online with a click. They want to call me or write me an email. And so we all the time heard a lot of negative feedback for our solution. And that was the core reason why we decided to move to the US. Then, of course, the pandemic hit, and suddenly the whole world moved online, which was giving us a boost. But at the same time, it made that move to the US a little less relevant, because now suddenly we're also seeing a big increase in Germany and Austria again, as the whole world became more ready or more transitioned more into this online world. But yeah, we were lucky because we were able to grow during the pandemic, and that was also why we were accepted to the Techstars program that Jan just mentioned in New York City, as well as the Venture City program, which is in Miami. So we did both programs at the same time. Unfortunately, they were both virtual, so it also worked out to do them at the same time. And we have since grown our team to 12 people. We have 2 people in the US at the moment, and the remaining 10 are spread all around the world, mainly in Austria. But that's kind of how we are split right now.
Why did you apply for those 2 programs? We had a Clubhouse session yesterday, and a lot of advice around how to enter or how to attract or approach the venture capital, for example, in the US. And a lot of people said through those programs of incubators and accelerators, you have a sort of entry point into the whole investment scene. Was that the reason in Midfox case?
Yeah, definitely. I do think that if you want to be successful in the US, it is very difficult to do so if you don't have a strong network of people. And even though I believe it is easy to create a network in the US, much easier than in other places of this world because people are very open and you have this very strong startup ecosystem, at the same time, you want to really create the right network. And that is sometimes a little more challenging. And these programs really give you access to great mentors, great investors. They make sure that you are on the right track when going to the US. And I think that this whole network is just invaluable. And that was the core reason why we decided to do the programs.
Before we move to Michna, what were your first steps when you went to New York? I mean, any down-to-earth advice to any other founders that want to move there? What do you start with?
Sure. I mean, I would start with really doing some market research. We, for example, ran ads, as I just mentioned, and really try to understand the customer base that is in the US and test our product first. And we then had to, unfortunately, do a flip to a US company, which is, it's not a nightmare, but it's not easy to do. And it does require a lot of lawyers, expertise, and tax expertise, and etc.
Why was that necessary? Did you have to change your company form?
So we had to change because the US investors were only interested in investing in a US company and they were not so keen on investing in an Austrian company. We had to create a US Inc. And then we had to, so to say, flip, and that's what they call it, the flip the Austrian company to the US and basically put the Austrian company as a subsidiary of the US company. And this whole process sounds easy, but it just takes a lot of time. So one probably tip that I would have is if you are seeing that the US is the right market for your product, I would definitely think about the company structure up front, because raising money with a foreign company is much more difficult in the US. And I think we could have saved a lot of headaches if we didn't had to go through all of that. However, it is doable. So even if you are an Austrian company right now, I don't think that should hinder you from going into the US or raising money in the US. It just is an additional step that was a little surprising to me how big that step actually was for a tiny company that we were at that stage.
Yeah. I just basically can underline what you just said, Susanne. So starting early, doing your homework is such an essential topic, especially if you're, for example, a company that has a lot of regulatory issues in healthcare or fintech. You have to go through a very long process, for example, healthcare getting FDA clearance and so on. This takes a couple of months, years, and doing the homework early, getting prepared, having a US squad that is working in bi-weekly, weekly shifts, has targets, and really constantly focusing on how to do the next step is really essential to make a kind of go or no-go decision. Yeah, so it's a very valid point. Thanks.
Okay.
I also think that sometimes it's maybe not as relevant to go immediately into the US market. Maybe you can do a lot, especially now with the pandemic and the world that we are living in. It's so easy to enter the market without physically being in the market, because you can have already investor meetings, you can have client meetings, and people don't really care if you are around the corner or if you're on a different continent, because you are anyways only meeting via video right now. So that is also something to consider, the timing of moving to the US.
Knowing the Austrian company forms, probably you had a GmbH, limited liability company. If you compare that to the US Inc., is a US Inc. an expensive, a bureaucratic company? What's your first impression on that?
I would say creating an Inc. is very easy, and the whole process is super easy to build a company. You have a lot of programs for startup founders that help you throughout the process. I think for us, it was a little bit of a more complicated situation because we already had the German company, already had IP that was created there. So that process seemed to me very complicated. But I think if you're just starting off a company in the US, it's very quick and easy to do so.
Michna, how was that in your case? Why did you decide to go to US, and how were your first steps and your learnings? Did you also have this issue of a company form?
Well, I think it's something like 99% the same experience, because we incorporated also in Romania. We developed product, and then we went to test the market in the US. The only difference that we had was that we didn't go through an accelerator. We used SelectUSA as our, let's say, foot in the door with getting good people, a good network there. We had the same issues with incorporation, the same issues with the flip. The actual flip for us was impossible in the seed round, because we had an EU based financier, VC, and we also had a US based one, and they couldn't put money. The US one wanted the money in the US. The EU wanted the money in the European Union. So we chose the one in Europe, but we're planning to do this flip in the Series A that we forecast by the end of this year. What I would add to what Suzanne said, maybe a huge difference. The reason why we went to the States is the same, because we are in the cybersecurity space, and cybersecurity is something still early in Romania. So the market is not that big, but in the US is something extremely relevant and extremely desired. And we chose to go to the US. The openness, as Suzanne stated, the openness of the people, the easiness to reach and to have discussions, it is there. I think a relevant point is also to know that the US market, I think, I have experience in selling in the US as well as in Western countries, and I perceive US as one of the most competitive selling countries in the world. They have one of the best. I think they have a good prep for sales, which means penetrating that market pushes you to upgrade your sales level, because otherwise, as Suzanne stated, an incorporation service can be from 1K to 30K. Any service can have a huge wide spread of prices, which of course in the startup game makes you want to be extremely careful.
Mm-hmm. Jan, maybe just to clarify, SelectUSA is a permanent support program from US Embassy only in Vienna or globally?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for asking. So to give a short background, the embassy, or I'm working in the embassy's commercial section, which is part of the so-called Department of Commerce, the Handelsministerium in German. And one program supporting international companies, so not only from Austria, is the SelectUSA program, which we offer all year round. And it's all about helping companies that think about setting up a presence or expanding their existing presence in the US and trying to make this step as easy as possible. We offer tailored services free of charge, confidential if needed, and really everything from market research about where to set up, how to find employee number one in the US, what are local incentives, introduction on a state level, because each state is different. Each state has different support programs. So we are a kind of door opener to get access to the, let's say, social capital that the financial capital will follow. So clients or investors will follow. And we work with all kinds of companies. It could be a small one, it could be a big one, existing investors. So we have at the moment, I find it really impressive, 800 subsidiaries of Austrian companies in the US.
Wow.
And some of the big names like First Alpine are of course there, but also an increasing number of startups. And we have offices in 80 countries around the world. And Michna has been working with Monica one of my colleagues. I'm mainly responsible for Austria, and I have colleagues that are covering other sectors. So we have a sector expertise and just try to support where it is necessary.
And once a year you have your flagship event, this year virtually in June. Can you give us just a short intro on that?
So the SelectUSA Summit, it's called, is our absolute flagship event. It's happening this year from the 7th to the 11th of June. So 5 days virtual event sounds a lot, but it's mainly the afternoons in our time zone. And there basically you can learn all the ins and outs, how to do the strategic step to market entry or expansion in the US. And we have a very specific SelectUSA Tech program, which is catering all startups. And what they get is basically they can virtually exhibit at the summit. They learn everything about the US startup ecosystem, about how to raise funding, what's the issue with regard to IP. Basically, every question can be answered, and we have a lot of accelerators there, VCs there, all kind of service providers that try to help this step and make it a little bit easier than without. And so I can strongly recommend it for companies that think a US market entry is a strategic step and is important for them and they would like to focus on.
Michna, how was it for you? Did you just knock on the door in Bucharest, or maybe just to give us some insights?
We prior to Coda, I was actually active in the services business, and I was already in contact with the U.S. Embassy, having some joint projects with one of the departments there, and I found out about this endeavor, and I thought it's the necessary step to actually know my market, and since we did that in mid. I think 2019, yes, because of the missing year. I think that the biggest impact that event had on us was we definitely changed 180 the view on what we have, on what we sell, on how we position. Basically, after the event, we soft closed our investment round, I think in less than 6 months, and I'm pretty sure that without that event, we would have worked a lot harder in order to improve our message.
What were the reasons for that? What was the advice that you can maybe share with our audience as well?
I participated in DC, in Washington DC, as well in a separate event in San Francisco, and in both of them the level of business was extremely different from the one that we had here locally, which again the biggest change was it made us ask a lot of questions, which we didn't have up to that point. So for the example, the improvement in our deck, in our pitch deck, before and after, I think it was monstrous.
So you were challenged a lot by experts from the US, okay.
Yes. And again, I think the openness that also Suzanne said earlier actually is a powerful point, because at least us in Romania, we're more we don't accept feedback, we don't search for it, we don't push for the negative feedback, we're kind of protective of ourselves. But for them it's so much easier to express both positives and negatives that actually gets you to think of other angles that you have never thought before.
Okay. Susanna, do you think that this mentality or this mindset in the US that Michna just mentioned pushes you to be better? Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most positive surprises for me was that overall people are very open to giving feedback, are very open to, in general, giving back. This whole giving back mentality is huge in the US, and people love sharing the advice, they love sharing the feedback with younger, unexperienced entrepreneurs. And I was just, when I first moved to the US, I didn't know anyone. And so what I did was I decided to write some CEOs on LinkedIn of bigger companies, huge startups, and I just asked for advice. And it was incredible to see how many people actually ended up meeting me for a coffee chat, giving me advice on my, at that time, really small startup, while they had a huge company to run. So I think this mentality is really valuable. And if you are open to receiving feedback, then the US has a lot of that to offer.
So would you say that just go for it and like write to Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg if you feel like? I mean, how open is the local community, and do you feel welcome there as a startup? Do you feel as a foreign startup, do you feel welcome there in the market?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, probably not Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, but overall, I do think that people do welcome you in this startup ecosystem, especially those bigger startup hubs like Silicon Valley or New York or even Miami. They have such an international crowd of people overall, and so many events before the pandemic, of course, and so many opportunities for you to meet people. And what I've also realized is that people do not shy away from introducing you to others in the US, and they're just happy to connect the dots much more, I would say, than in Austria. And so I think you do get the chance to build a network very easily in the US. And you don't need to be shy or unsure about it. I think you just have to do the first step, and definitely the first few networking events are a little awkward, but after a while you also realize that you're starting to meet the same people over and over again at the same events, and you're starting to build your own network very quickly. But of course, these accelerator programs or other governmental programs help a lot to get that first step into the market.
How is the legal status of entrepreneurs, foreign entrepreneurs? Do you need some working permits, or how does that work?
Yeah, so visa is definitely a big subject that you have to consider before going to the US. I mean, if you're just visiting, you can go on an ESTA, and that is easy. You just apply online. It takes a few minutes, and you can basically travel there and be there for 3 months. Other than that, there is an entrepreneurship visa that allows you to stay there for your business and work on your business for an unlimited time, I believe, or longer time at least, as long as you have your business. But to be honest, the visa situation is definitely something that may hinder you from fully entering the US. But that is also why I would suggest just going down an ESTA first or on a business visa and learning more about the market first before going into the whole visa process. Because there's a whole ABC of visa categories that you could consider. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs that have a variety of different visas that they've applied for and also gotten, but it is a process that is definitely not easy.
Is there a fast lane for entrepreneurs?
What I only can recommend is it's really depending on the setup, what you're planning to do. And I can only recommend to speak to our experts at the consulate that are super fast in responding. I'm so happy that we have them and are able to guide you in the right direction. At the moment, the situation is not so easy to travel to the US, but I'm very, very confident that as soon as the situation with the pandemic is getting better, it will be getting easier as well to travel to the US.
Michna, do you have employees in the US?
Yes, we do. We have one employee and one contractor. And we're planning actually to build up the US team as a business, as a revenue generator there, like the business development and sales, and to have in Romania the product development and support.
And what is your experience with employing somebody in the US? Is it something similar from what we know in Europe, or some advice on that piece as well?
I think the process from our experience was similar. The costs are definitely different, at least with the ones that we have in Romania. So that was a bit of a shocker, but we were expecting it. We documented it, so we had it in our business plan. But I think the process is it's basically the same. We have the same flows in Romania as well.
Okay.
So nothing there, just maybe because it's not about an employee, a possible employee in the local market where you can give a couple of phone calls and you can find some feedback out from the market itself. In the US, at least we did a little bit of background check as Google allows us to, in order to make sure that everything is okay, everything that's stated checks out.
Just one additional comment regarding finding employee number one in the US. This is maybe the hardest element of setting up. The reason is that you are competing with big brands, like you mentioned Mr. Musk, but also Google and so on. So there is a lack of talent, and there are other very strong brands. And as an Austrian startup or international startup entering the US, you're starting to build your brand. And what I would advise, and Misha mentioned, it isn't cheap to hire, and I wouldn't recommend to go for the cheapest offer. You will get what you pay for, right? And it can happen then after 6 months, you realize your colleague in the US said he's building a pipeline, but at the end, he has a side job and he didn't do anything. So you need to be very selective, need to find somebody who's really sharing your vision. Ideally, maybe your client becomes your first number one employee, or you have somebody like you, Susanne, who's going over and really building up the team. This can make a big difference, and it's really a make or breaker and really important for the first year.
Very interesting. Susanne, how was that in your case?
Yeah, I would agree that finding talent in the US is not an easy task. At least it wasn't for us, because as you said, Jan, there's just so much competition, and you really have to pitch your company to the good talents in order for them to choose you. So I find in Europe, at least, it's a little easier where you can actually pick among a great pool of talent, versus in the US to really find a great talent. I guess it's just more competitive, or it's unaffordable. And for us, it was also a big shock to see what even junior people were expecting in terms of salary. And you just have to think twice sometimes if you really want to, if it's really necessary to hire in the US, or if you can, what you can already do maybe from other countries. And we, for example, in our business plan, had planned to get much more, grow our US team much bigger by now. And then, of course, because of the pandemic, we realized that we don't really need people in the country at this point in time, because there are no physical meetings anyways. And so that is also why we shifted some of the resources back to Europe, just because it is just much, much cheaper, to be honest. So that is always a consideration, unfortunately, to have is the budget that you have available and how much you're getting, how much return you're getting on that investment.
I mean, the labor costs are obviously much higher. How is the investment situation? We talk about money, availability of money, follow-up rounds. Is that much easier? Do they immediately speak about higher numbers that you maybe wouldn't be able to get in Austria? Do you have any experience on that, or in Romania?
So, I mean, I can jump in real quickly. We had definitely in our first investor meetings a completely skewed image of what we could get as an investment sum. And now I've realized after a while that the US is just much bigger in terms of how much we in our stage could raise. And so we're talking about like almost double the size that we would mention in the US versus in Europe. At the same time, it is also more expensive to be in the US market. You need, as I said, more money for human resources. You also need much more budget to actually compete in terms of marketing and sales in this market. And so it's just a more expensive market overall. So I think it makes sense that the numbers are higher. And I also, what I've realized in the US is that it's a lot about storytelling and a lot about how you sell your vision versus just showing hard facts or a product. And I think that was a key learning for us, is to really shape our story, shape our pitch, and get people excited and create a momentum for it. And we are going to raise our next round in a few months, and I'll be happy to share my learnings from that. But our first round were much smaller, so it was quite easy for us to get it, or easier than in Europe, I would say.
Are you going to try to raise it in the US?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And selling your vision and focusing on storytelling on your pitch towards the investors or all over the place, towards employees, towards investors, towards potential clients. Is that relevant on all levels?
Yeah, I think in the US, communication is just, it seems to be much more important than the way you sell this big vision. And I think that is helpful on all levels, on getting clients, getting investors, getting employees on board. At least from my experience with talking with investors in Austria, it was much more about showing the product, showing our team, showing the numbers that we had, and more like the hard facts. And I do feel like in the US, you can actually raise much more if you're really good at storytelling. But it's also a skill to learn, and it's not an easy skill.
I mean, Michne, you said as well that your pitch sort of got exponentially improved. Does that mean that they don't care about the numbers, or do they look at the numbers as well?
They do, but what we've learned was that we started the other way around, because investors at this level of startup, the early stage startups, they don't focus on having the best product. They invest in a team that shows trust that they can actually deliver the promises. So basically, everything is more about communication, about setup, about organization, rather than just product. Product is just part of a set of elements. Mm-hmm. And us in Romania, as Suzanne stated, we started with product. We developed 3 years, 4 years in, and then we wanted to show product, which was fundamentally wrong, because product first vision and then product delivers. But you have to have the right vision to have the right scalability. You have to have the right values that your business can take off, because that's the selling part. And then it's your job to execute.
Would you guys say that this is something, because it's super interesting, would you say that this is something which is important to understand in order to approach the US market? Or would you say after this experience that this is something that you would advise to any founder worldwide?
To anyone.
Okay.
I think I've learned the hard way this. We invested time and money and everything, and then we had to change certain parts. We had to adapt to the reality, and it's always easier to have your reality stated, to have a North metric star, to have marketing interviews with potential customers, to have just mock-ups to see how the average user interacts with your idea, to have everything set up before actually dive in the product development.
Susanna was nodding. I guess you have the same experiences. You were sort of enriched by that learning from there.
Yeah, so I think we also spent way too much time in the beginning on product without thinking about the big vision and talking enough to our customers. So that was definitely a key learning. And I think overall, for anybody going into the US, even if it's just for a few weeks, to learn that mentality, to understand how they do things, is, I think, super valuable, even if you then decide to go back to Europe and continue your company in Europe. I think you would have a really good head start if you learn from the best in the US. And they do have just a lot of things figured out, to be honest. And one other thing that I would like to add in terms of fundraising, which was also quite surprising for me, was that the thing that I said before with introductions and how easy it is to get introductions, I think it's the same for fundraising. You just have to play that game of asking for introductions and building a network and building relationships. And it's not so easy to access great investors, but if you have a network, then it's of course much easier. And one thing that, for example, we've been using recently a lot is asking founders for introductions, and also other investors that we talk to, asking them again for introductions. So really just using this introduction game in order to build up a network of potential investors. And the other thing is that you should, at least that was our experience, that it's not easy to just enter the market and like you have a PowerPoint presentation and 2 weeks later you have money in your bank from an investor. It is a process, and I think especially as a founder who's not originally based in the US and who doesn't already have the huge network from maybe a top university or from just living in the US, it just takes a little longer than you might expect to actually get investments. So keep that in mind, I would say.
Just one sentence to add. So understanding the VCs in the US, you also have to understand the startup landscape there. And looking, for example, at AI, we have 6,000 companies in the field of AI. So the competition is quite fierce, so kind of 10x compared to Europe in some sectors. And if you're the US investor or VC, you maybe would prefer to invest in a US solution. But in the moment when you have a European startup that has a presence already in the US, a small team, done all the, let's say, branding, has the .com domain, and basically the look and feel that it's a US solution, it's much easier for the US VC to identify and say, okay, I'm going for this solution, especially if it has some USP that is outstanding and it's better than the solution that's already existing. So on the other side, we heard yesterday in the Clubhouse talk that a lot of US VCs are now in Europe.
Yeah, that's
and actually it should get easier to
pandemic
find.
dynamic. Yeah. They're opening offices in France and Germany and maybe Austria. That was quite it's a recent development that as we could hear. Can you just, I mean, we hear a lot about 90-second speech and elevator pitching, and you can just pitch your idea all over the place. Do you have this experience that if you see some investors in a coffee shop, you just approach them and say, hey, can I pitch my idea to you? Or is that a story?
Yeah. Well, I definitely, especially in Silicon Valley, I was part of this Go Silicon Valley program and in the US as well. And we spent a few months in Silicon Valley, and it was crazy how often I had to pitch our product. And even when I was sharing an Uber with people, it was like I was pitching, then the other person was pitching. Then, like one time, even an Uber driver was pitching his startup because he was outside, driving Uber. So it was crazy to see how much this pitching mentality is there. And so you really have to. I know they always say that this elevator pitch. You just really have to practice this and. Get used to that kind of mentality, which can be quite exhausting too. If it's always about pitching, but it's also a fun game.
Always in performance mode, huh?
Yeah.
I'll just add one thing here. If you start working on a product before the story, imagine how you can put in 30 seconds or less 3 years of work and choose the right functionalities, choose the right words that will get you your next meeting. That's heartbreaking.
Yes. You want to share everything, all the nights of hard work and weekends of hard work you want to share, but it's more about... do you have any no-goes that you could share with us?
No-goes. I don't know. I think that overall, you should just really think about going into the US and the costs and the not only the costs for building your company, for tax advisory, for legal advisory, for employees, for even living expenses. It's just a lot of commitment. So I think just calculating that in and figuring out at what stage to go into this country. I don't think it's really. I believe that the way we have it, and also Michna, it sounds like you have it set up that you have the development team in Europe and then the business development team in the US. I think the setup is really valuable because you save a lot of money on the development and you get a really good skilled team while being in the market in the US. And that is also in a way our plan or where we're heading. But that is something that you can only do once you already have something to sell, because there's no point in entering too early without a ready product and then sitting in a tiny room in New York, paying a fortune in rent, and just working on the product.
Is that a competitive advantage of European startups moving to US compared to the ones who are in the US?
I would say so. I think that a lot of our competitors have had, a lot of our direct competitors have spent much more money on building the exact same functionalities that we have. And I think that in general, European companies are often a little more cost conscious, and because we just have maybe less access to a lot of funding, so we're trying, to bootstrap in the beginning much more, I would say. And I've also had the experience that in investor meetings, this fact that we have our development team in Austria and we're keeping it in Austria was definitely not a disadvantage. I think it was probably even an advantage.
So they don't demand for the whole team to move to the US?
That was, at least for us, never the case.
Michna?
No, neither for us. Romania has a long-standing line of IT people for 30 years in the States. I think we are quite respected in this industry, but the difference of cost between Romania and US is so staggering that any investor sees huge value in it. So, but I would add as a don't, at least when you're small, when you're a startup, don't try to educate your market. Try to find a problem that exists, that is known, and try to fix it in a simple way. If as a startup you start trying to change people, trying to make them see anything in your business model, then your chances are small, because you don't have the power of the investment money in order to generate that need. You have to go on an existing need. Also, I would say that again, valid for Romania, maybe more than Austria, is the fact that again, from the three key points, which is product, marketing, and sales, we always start with product. I think marketing should be number one in exploring the go-to-market strategy and the product market fit. If you have a marketing validation, then you can go to a sales and product, just in this order. Never start with product again. And maybe another thing which might be peculiar to Romania is embrace criticism. Again, what I consider a huge value to the US entrepreneurs and people is that they enunciate much easier also the minuses, which you have to take and embrace them and use them in your path, and not to take them personally. I think that's a huge change that you have to be able to do. Otherwise, it could be a problem for you and your business.
Feedback is the breakfast of champions, so to say.
Yes.
Such an interesting talk. I mean, I'm afraid I could go on for hours, Jan.
Yeah. I've only one don't that I would love to add. So the US is one country, but actually you have to see it almost as a continent. I mean, comparing the size, we have the EU 27 now, not 28 anymore, and just the GDP is like 10 times higher than the European EU 27. And if you try to conquer the US in one go, it's quite a difficult task. So you maybe should focus on a niche, maybe on one state, on one target group. And talking about clients, don't go for the very big tickets at the beginning. Maybe a medium-sized company will be easier, less bureaucratic, less red tape, easier to convince of your solution, and you will learn so much, then adapt your product, and then are ready for the next group of clients, next state, next region. So I would go in a step-by-step process in, let's say,
that's
growing
interesting.
in the US.
Let's just briefly reflect on that, because we hear a lot. The advantage of the US is it's such a huge, big market. You have one product and you have like 300 million of potential customers. But what you advise here is now to focus maybe and to take into account that there are 52 different countries.
Yep. It's very much depending on the solution. If you have a consumer app, this easily can be rolled out. But if it's a healthcare product, there could be different regulation in each state.
Each state, okay. Any learnings on that from your side, Susanne? Yeah.
So for me, I guess it was just the fact that you have to also consider, for example, when you're hiring people in different states, you also have to think about what kind of implications that has on taxes, which I completely did not think about upfront. That, for example, when we're hiring somebody in a different state, that if that person is doing sales or creating value for our company, it might change the way we have to pay taxes in different states and also register in different states. So that was a interesting learning for me. Also the fact that VAT laws are very different in each state, and so what kind of sales taxes you have to pay in each state is also
so would you
still a little bit of a zone that I have not completely understood yet.
Would you compare it to, let's say, Austrian startup trying to sell their products to France and Germany and Ireland and I don't know what? Is it comparable, or is it more harmonized and easier?
I would say it's comparable.
Okay.
But I mean, we have not reached, in certain states, we've not reached the thresholds yet where it becomes very complicated. So I'll be able to know more about that in a few months, hopefully.
Okay. Michna, you have any learnings on that?
Well, I think what Jan is saying is perfectly true. You can either learn it from him, or you can learn it by the hard way, because we jumped a few steps and had some discussions with some bigger names and bigger players, which validated the product. But the second question after product was, how many existing customers, what's your traction in the US? So hitting bigger tickets, at least as a startup, as a new guy on the block, definitely you need some easier targets just to show the necessary traction and trust, because the big possible customers will never go for your solution if it's not validated in the market.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting talk. That's a good so to say, closing remarks, so that we can say again, yes, if you are anticipating to enter the US market, there is Jan and his colleagues, and in June we have SelectUSA Summit, maybe a final call, so to say, if you want anybody to join.
Yeah, maybe just one important learning, I think, is really it boils all down to engage early. So engage with people that help you, and I'm more than happy to help any startup, scale up, or a company that is planning to set up shop in the US or plans to grow. We have this event coming up, the summit in June. The website is SelectUSASummit.us. It's a great program. Just have a look, and if you want to learn more, I'm more than happy. Please get in touch. Yeah.
Susanne, Michna, thank you very much for taking time for this talk, for all the insights. I found it super interesting. Kind of like a few new aspects that I've learned from this talk. Thank you for taking your time. Jan, thank you for organizing this talk and for all the insights and learnings. And thank you for being with us in this talk. That was our scaling into the US